week on the show, we're delighted to introduce David Chancellor. David is a photographer probably best known for his nature and conservation work. He's a multi-award winner, having won won the Taylor Wessing Portrait Prize in previous years, and he's a regular contributor to National Geographic. David, you're calling in from Saudi Arabia. I don't believe you're from there originally. Can you give us a bit of background and kind of how you your journey into photography, how you've ended up in Saudi, and what that kind of all looks like?
Originally born in the UK, lived in the UK up until lived in the UK for a while, but left and started to do or did a degree in advertising editorial documentary photography when I was about 17, 18, and then started to work on international projects and stories. Started out as a sports photographer, kind of what I'd always wanted to do. Focused very much on that for 3 or 4 years, and then found myself, which is going to sound very lush, but found myself going to the same events on a regular basis and questioning why I was doing it. So, another Wimbledon. Do I really want to do another Wimbledon? Mm-hmm. And I think when that started to make me think about what I was doing and did I want to just continue doing that, I then started to look for freelance stories and have worked in that environment ever since through various agencies and now totally independently and through National Geographic. So, background in the UK, qualification, if you like, or study in the UK, and then worked international since then. I work on long-term projects, and I've always tried to work on long-term projects. And I remember, Tom and I were just chatting earlier, I remember meeting somebody who referred to the work I was doing as, it's okay for you, you kind of parachute in and then do what you do and then leave, and we have to continue. And that sort of made me think very much about not parachuting in, but staying. So I have far too many long-term projects that generally involve me moving to where I'm working and staying for a considerable amount of time and setting up an infrastructure that allows me to function. So I have bases, you thought I was based in South Africa. I still work out of South Africa. I have a base in South Africa, I have a base in Kenya. Both of those countries have projects currently running. And I'm just starting a 2-3 year project in Saudi Arabia now, looking at rewilding of Kingdom, Saudi Arabia. So I'm based in Saudi as well. So I still have a footprint in the UK, but I haven't worked in the UK for 25 years plus probably. And the work I do...
That's an amazing commitment to be able to commit yourself to a project to the point where you'll move your entire base.
Yeah. It is a commitment. Have I felt it a commitment? I think maybe those around me have probably felt it as a commitment more than I felt it as a commitment, mm-hmm. which is probably the reason not to do it. But I've always felt that if you're going to do these projects, you need to be available and you need to be able to have long-term relationships and dialogues with those that you're working with. It's, there's various different situations in my career that have confirmed that is the way that I wanted to work. Up until mm-hmm. recently, I shot Mamiya 7s and so therefore 120 film, because I also felt that sort of slow journalism was something that I wanted to do. That meant it was quite difficult for, I was going to say subjects, but the people I worked with to actually see what I was doing. So I would also shoot Polaroid and give Polaroid to the individuals that I was working with, just so they had a reference. So again, part of the commitment then I think is to leave something, is to leave a footprint. So mm-hmm. whether it be a picture or whether it be a local cell number or a WhatsApp that people can call you on and tell you look, this is happening and I know you were interested in it and it's happening tomorrow. And to be able to say, okay, I'll be there tomorrow, rather than, well, logistically, I can't really do that. I've always felt that was important, but there are relationship issues around that, and there are financial issues around that. But I can't really work any other way. So that's where I am.
I guess to get the access and the permissions from people to be part of their lives, such as in the Hunters Project, where you're working with people from all across the world, because there were people coming in to do hunts, weren't there? Flying in to do hunts, and you were documenting some of those. But also then working with kind of local kind of workers in the areas in which you were shooting. Do you think that part of obviously to get the access, to get given permission and to get the trust, you really need to be present like you are? That's probably part of it, right?
That's it. It is, yeah.
Okay. And do you think that when you talk about kind of the long-term projects, so the Gamekeeper was one that you did, is that something that is still ongoing, or have you completed that project now, the work you're doing at Gamekeepers?
Yeah, Gamekeeper is a really important project for me. It's not something that I'm continuing to do. Possibly out of all the projects, I wish it was, because it was something that I really wanted to look at for many different reasons, and wanted to follow that particular story through. It came about, I guess, as a result of Hunters and an extension of that, and trying to understand from a cultural and government and ecological and societal perspective what happens when people commit in the same way as I do to what they believe to be a life's cause, and how does that affect them, and what happens when the support networks, I'm largely responsible for my own support networks, but what happens when those support networks are withdrawn, such as gamekeepers who are third and fourth generation gamekeepers, and they're finding that the government is closing estates or banning certain practices that they've historically used, or closing schools that their children are educated at because there's only 2 or 3 in a class, which means that the children have to then go elsewhere, which means the wives generally will move away from the areas and the estates that the gamekeepers are working on. I wanted to look at all of that. And I would still like to look at all of that. But there's a point you get to where you're so pulled that it makes it very difficult, and you naturally come to an end of a project and think, well, and there's never really a timeline on these projects. It's just, okay, I think I've done that. I'd like to continue it. If I could continue it, I would. But it really is pretty much complete. And so Gamekeeper it's a good choice of a question, because Gamekeeper is something that I would still really like to be involved in. I'm still very involved with the people that I worked with for that project. I was speaking to Peter Fraser the other day, who worked on the estate, who really is where I started, about what's happening there, about what the government are doing and the issues he's facing. And whenever possible, I will go back to Scotland. I will go back to those estates and see the people I work with and have a look at what's happening, and maybe document some more stories around that. But it's not as much as I wish it was an ongoing project. My wife is ex-wife was separated, is Scottish. My son is a perfect, I guess, example of everything that I do. He's born in Cape Town, lives in Scotland. So when I go back, and I'm going to go back and see them in a week or so, then I will go back to Scotland. So yeah, so I have a base in Scotland.
How do you make it work in terms of, with long-term projects? I think a lot of photographers that are interested in doing documentary work maybe don't have the same commitment to a project as you clearly do. But how do you make it work financially in terms of taking on these long-term projects? Because obviously you've moved to an area. Do you have to have multiple ways of funding these things, where maybe be it through grants, through kind of print sales, through your gallery,
through
assignments and commissions, and then through private commissions.
Through everything, correct. But then there's also specific organizations and individuals who I would work with without considering that, and certain stories that I would work on without really considering that. So I think probably, like most photographers, I'm not particularly smart with finance, and a lot of the projects and the work that I do is unsustainable. I have an accountant who used to have, who constantly just says to me, I don't understand what you're doing.
And the harsh realities of it, isn't it?
It is the harsh realities. And when you asked in the beginning there, where did all this start? It started when I was probably about 11 years old, and I started to use my father's camera. I've never wanted to do anything else, having done that. I said I wanted to be a photographer. He said I should get a steady job because I'd need to, to generate income and probably have a family one day. So I started out doing foreign exchange dealing. I lasted a month, and they called me in for an appraisal and said, we're not quite sure why you're here. And what's more concerning for us is we don't actually know whether you know why you're here. So I'm not sure you should be here. And that's kind of sums up my, if you like, my competence around finance and, what it means to commit to the projects. I commit because I think it's something that I should care about and people should care about. Therefore, I will commit to it and think about the consequences at a later date.
I know you say that. Now, we've had people on before who've kind of said similar. How much research do you do into the project before you make? Because it's a huge commitment. If you're going to upend your life for the project, you need to be 100% certain of it, right?
Certain of what?
Well, certain that A, you're going to be able to get enough to create a long-term project. There's going to be some sort of financial reward versus the risk, and also that it's going to creatively fulfill you and tell the story you kind of want to tell of it, or kind of there's going to be enough story there for you to then create a great body of work, which obviously you do. But there's got to be, you can't just go, that looks interesting, let's go. Surely, right? No,
you can't. But I mean, and there's a lot of questions in there that I would probably have to write down to answer them. But I mean, there's a lot of things in there that make sense. Creative fulfillment is obviously important, and I'm never short of creative fulfillment, but I am frustrated sometimes by an inability to be able to find an audience initially who understands. But I think as you get older and as you work on more of these projects, you gain a provenance which allows you to do that, and also opens doors potentially for access. We wouldn't be having this conversation if some of the work I'd done has not been well received. I'm always looking for different ways for that work to be seen and to be received. So I'll take a punt at projects if I think they're important, and if I find them generally, wrong in some way, or distressing in some way, then I will probably go for them more than if they are relatively easy and uncomplicated. So, and there will be a catalyst somewhere along the lines, with Butterflies and Warriors, which is very much an ongoing project. It's enormously frustrating for me because to try and get interest and finance in it as a solid ongoing project, I found almost impossible. Yet breaking off portions of that project has been relatively successful. And some of the people I work with, like Lars, who used to be at Geo, and Kathy at National Geographic, and have taken certain parts of that project and funded it. And that's allowed me to go out and do the work that that is not funded. But that project came about in 2012 from a commission with the Sunday Times in the UK, who wanted to look at 3 of the planet's greatest conservationists. And one of them I worked with, Ian Craig, who is without a doubt one of the planet's greatest conservationists and largely unsung, as most conservationists are and probably should be, said, yeah, it's great and thanks. And I was literally sitting behind him in a 2-seater aircraft just flying to somewhere we were going in Kenya. And he said to me, look, if you want to look at a project, you should look at this project, which was Northern Rangelands Trust at the time. And I said, okay, I don't know anything about it. And he said, that's exactly the point. So I said, yeah, that is exactly the point. So how do I do this? And he said, well, while you're here, if you've got a spare day, I'll show you. And he showed me the work they were doing. And I said, yeah, this is brilliant. So, how do I do this? And he said, well, we can give you access. For me, access is key. So everything else falls apart at that point. So I spoke to somebody within the Northern Rangelands Trust and said, okay, this is a really important project. I think this is amazing. I think this can turn around the poaching crisis that was slaughtering wildlife at an extraordinary rate in Kenya at the time. I was based in South Africa. And I'll give you a month every quarter for the next 3 years if you give me tent and food and a car and all of the information I need. And they said, okay, fine. So at no point did I say I want you to pay me, because I knew they didn't have the money. But I knew that if I got that access and I could work and I could be there every month for a quarter for the next 3 years, I could produce work that I could put out to different organizations and generate money, not that would pay me for the time I was spending, but would definitely cover some of the costs. That's how Butterflies and Warriors started. Now Butterflies and Warriors is probably in its 13th year. And it's more difficult now for me to find time to get back and do it, because, a lot of the people that I talk to about working in East Africa will simply say, well, we've done East Africa. That as an answer is just appalling, because, you've never done a community like the Samburu. And it's, it morphs itself and manifests itself into different situations. A long-term project should be looked at and should be funded, but to try and find individuals who fund is incredibly difficult. So I try and move on to other projects. So, the project I'm doing in Saudi and other projects, I will pump funding into continuing to do the Kenyan work and the South African work. So a lot of it drags on. Scotland's gamekeeper, I haven't done, and I should do, and maybe that's just because it's geographically, culturally, not that these have ever stopped me, but it's such a jump, it's such a step from what I'm doing. Saudi is very similar to what I've done in Kenya and what I've done in South Africa and what I've done in other parts of the world. Similar but very different. But Scotland requires such a mental, physical, and emotional commitment that I just haven't managed to keep going with it.
Do you think? I mean, obviously, you're competing with these stories with, especially nowadays, documentary teams and films and things that kind of get made and they get packaged.
You're not, Greg.
You're not. But what I guess what I'm interested in is they're creating something that kind of goes out once, and what you're doing is you're trying to create something that is, a good photo will stand the testament and be there for years and years and years, and people will own that and they'll buy prints and they'll have it on their wall. So I guess what I'm getting at is the difference between documentary photography and long-term documentary photography, which used to be the norm when magazines were commissioning and the photo story, whereas nowadays it's gone to being more documentary is almost in the realms of galleries and the art world. How do you see that kind of evolution? Do you think that that's, when you're photographing people, do they understand the significance of how that picture will last for a long time? Is there a sense?
Yeah, that's a really good question. No, not initially, but they very quickly do. And, just it's not to sound, just to answer your first question, it's not to sound, flash or precious, or you're not competing with anyone. You're just not. It's maybe you used to. Maybe if I'm sitting at the edge of a tennis court, then yeah, sure, I'm looking for a better ball on the racket than the person who's sitting. Bob Martin, who is just an extraordinary. If you haven't interview Bob or talk to Bob. Who's just the most extraordinary human being and photographer. I mean, that there's a competition there. But the work I do, there just isn't. Your battle is not to be first or to beat other people, which is why stepping back to use something like Mamiya 7s, or now I use GFXs, because they're the nearest things that I can get to a Mamiya 7. And they're slow, and if I stand next to somebody, I brought somebody out the other day to work with me, Javier, who's brilliant, to work with me on herps, on snakes, because I don't really do snakes and reptiles, not because I don't like them. I love them, but it's just not what I do. You stand to somebody who's working on Sonys, and it's like, and I'm. So, there's no, that's just not a competition. There's just no point. But to try, and you're right, in as much as what was interesting with hunters, and you mentioned the Taylor Wessing, is for me, the sweet spot is to try and produce, and that will happen with my social media as well. But now I battle with my social media because, I don't maybe tweak the right algorithms. But a social media post will take me 2 or 3 days. I'm currently on third day to do a post that I'll probably put up tonight if I'm lucky, or maybe tomorrow, because I want it to run in a certain way, and I want it to be confusing in a positive way, and also to be beautiful. So it's not about, showing what a wonderful time I'm having in Greece. It's about trying to get somebody to look at something and kind of go, oh, that's beautiful. I didn't know that happened. Now, that's selling, that's prints, and that sweet spot between fine art and documentary is what I will, and I'm continuing and increasingly trying to do with the work that I do. Taylor Wessing, classic point. Hunters was a horrible subject, but it was something that I felt we needed to talk about. And, the poaching crisis in Kenya followed on from that, because it was a logical follow-on. You're going to kill stuff to make money from it. But there's something that says that, and this is the National Geographic story that I did for them on trophy hunting, is, do we need to kill wildlife to save it? And in many cases now we do, because there's too many of us. So we need to generate income from it. South African mantra is, if it pays, it stays. If it doesn't pay, it doesn't stay. It's never a truer word. If you can't make money from something, then there's a lot of people who will just give up on it. So for me, to try and draw an audience into something that is a pretty appalling subject, and something that you will show to people and they will just simply go, and National Geographic talks and lectures and seminars will tell you that every time. If people are doing this, you've missed the point, because they're turning away. If people are going, how can I help? How do I stop this? And they're not covering their eyes, then that's your sweet spot. So Huntress with Buck, which was the Taylor Wessing image, was a classic case in point. I was always trying to shoot something that referenced the 18th century and sometimes earlier, when aristocracy would kill wildlife. But I was trying to say with the imagery, look, here's a person standing bolt upright with a leopard. One, it's wrong. But two, that person is not aristocracy. That person is a builder. That person is a plumber. That person is somebody who has saved up all of their lives to kill that leopard. Why have they done that? And why do they think that's right? So with Josie and Huntress with Buck, there I had the perfect situation. And it goes back to commitment as well. Is the guy who I'd been working with, who was a professional hunter, had no creativity. He did not have a creative bone in his body. I worked with him for 3 years, and by the end of the 3-year project, he was ringing me up and saying, the light today is unbelievably beautiful. Where are you? I was like, I'm in Cape Town. He's like, okay, well, we've got a young, redheaded 12-year-old coming over with our family to shoot her first animal. The light and the mountains are incredible. If you're available. So 6 hours later, having driven there, I drove there. I met Josie, and I shot that picture. I had 3 or 4 frames, and it's like a quarter of a second, the end of the day, on a Mamiya 7 on 160, and I'm just like, okay, this is a good frame. I processed it, and I looked at it, and just said, okay, this crosses over. This is this is a whoever you want to use, a constable, or this has that light that just references. Is if people are going to like it, people are going to want to have it. They're not immediately going to see that animal over the horse is dead. They're just going to see Diana, the huntress.
So in a way, I don't want to use the word subversive, but there's an element of needing to kind of sneak a prospect through. And I mean, somebody like Salgado, for example, got criticised. Obviously passed away this year. Got criticised for sometimes making his pictures too beautiful in a way. But there's an argument to be had that in order to be able to get an image translated across and to get it into people's homes, into the kind of mainstream the communication and the kind of the conversation, you need to be able to make an image that's complicated enough, almost like a Trojan horse, that gets through.
If you want to get to a different audience, if you want to get to the same audience, which is why I say you're not competing with anybody, because if you don't have your own style, then you're not doing what I'm doing. So you've got to have that. There has to be something that you're looking for. And with that project, when I saw that image, was like, okay, so if I can get this into a fine art audience, National Portrait Gallery, then I'm going to hit a whole load of people who are, a large number are going to be pro, but a large number are going to be anti-hunting. But it's an entirely different audience. They're not going to look at my work. But if this gets hung in the National Portrait Gallery, then this is going to get a completely different audience. And I felt that it was strong enough to do that. But you never know whether you're going to win it. And the Taylor Wessing is an enormous, enormous prize. And
to be fair, she was redheaded.
She was, and that's exactly one of the categories. It's as you know, is a young redheaded beautiful girl. So it ticks a lot of boxes. Now I printed that in South Africa, and then I shipped it over to Brian, who is the greatest printer in the world, who works at Artful Dodgers in London, and said, can he put it into the National Portrait Gallery, do the whole process, because I was in South Africa. And he rang me up and he said, I can, but I'm going to reprint it. I said, okay, why? And he said, because this is not Europe. It's not the light that you shooting. It's been printed by a South African who sees magenta in a different way to the way we see magenta. So I'm going to reprint it.
Wow.
So he hand reprinted it, and he reprinted it in a way that pulled the magenta, it's beautiful, and submitted it. And then they came back to me and said, okay, well, you're kind of shortlisted. So now this is commitment again. So I rang Josie, who was 12 at the time, and said, this is potentially, where it's shortlisted, it's 1 or 3. It's probably not going to get anywhere. Are you happy with that? Because I'll pull it if you're not. Because it was the first animal that she'd shot, and she was probably going to get a lot of shit for it. Mm-hmm. And she said, okay, I need to talk to my parents. Spoke to her parents, and her parents said, what's the possibility of it winning? And I said, no idea. It's 1 out of 3. Don't know. But if you want to pull it, we'll pull it. And they thought about it for 3 or 4 days, and they came back and they said, no. If we're committed enough to shoot an animal, then why would we hide? We can stand up in front of whoever wants to talk to us about it. And that's the reason you shot it. Yeah, sure.
Wow.
So I said, okay, fine. And
Amazing.
They came to the award ceremony. And so
there's a picture of you stood with her by the picture, right?
Yeah. And I was chatting to her yesterday. And she's coming through Dubai in a couple of days, and I'll go meet her in Dubai. And
It's fantastic because it's so it tackles all the nuances that the debate has. I mean, it's not a clear cut, conversation. The idea of hunting and the rights and wrongs in it, and in a way, the picture kind of, as you said, it challenges all of that, and it challenges you to have that conversation, which is
And you're not trying
really
to
hope for.
You're not trying to produce a Trojan horse. I understand that comment, and in some ways I am, but it's taking the piss. But the curl, the sleeping giraffe is classic, stunningly beautiful. Sold prints on that have come back 2 or 3 days later because somebody's gone, is this alive? I've gone, no, it's dead. Right. Do you mind if we have our money back? And I'm like, yeah, sure. But it's still a beautiful image. So why do you want your money back? So it's this. It's
at that stage. Sorry, have you gone? Yeah, it's alive, just to keep the sale.
No,
I'd be like, no,
I haven't, because I'm just like, if you think, in a way, if you think that's alive, yeah, maybe you shouldn't be buying those prints. So no, I haven't, and I'm not. I think with what we do as photographers, I'm going to sound like some angel. I'm far from a fucking angel, but we have an enormous responsibility. Gamekeepers, they were extraordinary. Gamekeepers, we researched. We found Gary, and Gary is like a 3rd or 4th generation gamekeeper. And we said to him, okay, I want to spend a year with you, a year. And he said, okay. I said, so I'm going to be with you a year. And he said, yeah, okay, that's fine. I said, but I also want to understand when your children go to school, what you're doing, et cetera, et cetera. And he said, yeah, okay. He said, my wife is 3 months pregnant. And I said, okay, fine. And he said, so she'll give birth during this project. I said, okay, fine. And he said, do you want to document that? I said, yeah. And he said,
yeah, because
okay.
I was going to ask you actually about that, because yes, obviously through the project, and there is a picture of a baby. You were at the birth.
Yeah.
Amazing.
And
that's a level of access that that's full on welcome into the life.
But the point is, yeah, totally. But the point is, those are hands, his hands, and it became about his hands. Those are the hands that both save and kill. Because he has to, he's pulling fetus out of deer because there's too many of them to kill them. And he delivers his own child with the same bloodied hands. So there were so many references there to his hands that it was just like, we can't not do this. And he was a photographer, loved photography. And he was like, I never thought of that. You're so right. So yeah, it's access. It's having trust from people to say, sure, you can come and photograph my wife give birth. So am I going to tell somebody that a giraffe is awake when it's not?
No, fair enough.
If you're stupid, I'm not criticizing you, Tom. It's a fair comment.
No, if I'm honest, I was just only making a joke. So with the access on that, him being a photographer, do you think that was helpful, or do you think he thought, oh, he'll just turn up, take a couple of snaps, and then we'll see him in 6 months?
I didn't think, and no one ever does, I didn't think that he would think I would be as full on as I am. I think he thought, yeah, this is great, and it's great for the industry, and this would be a brilliant article, and yeah, of course you can. But then when I was there, like every day, and walking the hills with him when it was snowy, rainy, sunny, documenting his kids going to school, his wife giving birth, fires. And I was working with a writer towards the end of that, and she came and spent a month there. And at the time, we were sleeping on heather most nights. We were just sleeping out because it was light there at 2:30, 3 o'clock in the morning, and he would be out. And so we were like, okay, And Gazer, who was the writer, was just like, the fuck am I doing? I was just like, well, what you're doing is gamekeeper's life. That's what you're doing.
Living their life, right?
Yeah.
With the access. Oh, sorry, Greg, go on.
Well, no, I think your question would be more pertinent. I wanted to circle back to something, but
okay. Well, yeah, quickly, just with the access and with that level of access, where's the limit? At what point do you go, okay, I'm going to take a step back because they're feeling uncomfortable that I'm here so much, or they're getting pissed off that I'm just constantly there? How do you kind of deal with it? Does that ever come up? Well, I'm sure it does, but like, how do you deal with it?
It hasn't come up.
Has it not?
No, not that I can think of. And maybe that is an example of, the sort of autism that I think all photographers have, to a degree. That, I'm not saying you don't see it, because you do see it, but and I'm far from, I hope, far from aggressively in their face, but I would I would dial it back or try and find a way to work with it. But
you
I'm
strike me as somebody who'd be quite quiet and not constantly asking questions. I don't think I would be able to do a long-term project like this. I think, and I'm sure the listeners would agree, I would grate on them after 7 or 8 minutes. So I'm just,
no,
I'm
you
just
can't
super,
do that.
I'm
Sorry, Tom. Go on.
no, go on. No, I was done.
You can't. I mean, hunters again. I mean, if you're, if you're so, I'm trying to think of an emotional word. Into is not an emotional word, but if you're so connected with wildlife and conservation as I am, the last thing you want to be doing is spending a month hunting elephants. When you know that the end result and their happiness is going to be when they kill an elephant. And yet you have to do it because it's that moment that could be the strongest moment, but it could also not be the strongest moment. There could be something else. It could be anything. So with a lot of the stuff that I did, I let the elephants. You sleep in a tent with 4 hunters for a month. You have to get on with people that you may not like. You certainly don't agree with what they're doing, and you may come to really like at the end of it, but still not agree with what they did, but have a really interesting and open dialogue. What you can't do is great. And that was literally what it was sleeping side by side, literally side by side, with 3 hunters who were, so there's 4 of us. 3 hunters, 4 of us, yeah. 2 hunters and a professional hunter and me in one tent. And you're walking every day. You're walking on tracks for elephants for 20 Ks to try and you're living the life of the elephant is what they're trying to do. Is like, okay, there's an elephant. We know it's big. We know it's in a herd. Okay, there's a print of its ear where it's lay down in the mud. So we know it's big. Its tusk's gone into the ground. How deep's the hole in the... Okay, so we know. Okay, we need to walk faster. We need to walk faster. Okay, there's the elephant. We can see the elephant. Can we shoot the elephant? Is the elephant something we want to shoot? We're not going to shoot the elephant. Let's walk back. And then, are we going to shoot the elephant? And then we're going to kill the elephant. And the elephant is the same age as they were or as I was. And you're just like, then you think about everything you just said to me. It's like you think about what's happened in your life, your first school, you're failing at foreign exchange team. This elephant's been walking. Everything. Your first PE kit, your first school blazer, the elephant's walking. And then you find yourself standing with 3 guys who wanted to shoot us. And then they kill it.
How, I mean, sorry to kind of take it to this, but when you're shooting this, you're photographing it. Obviously, you're photographing it on film, and the power of photography really is the fact that you're selecting this moment to go back to this elephant's life and talking about the length of its life and all of these things it's done, and then its death gets immortalized in 1/60th of a second. This sliver of time where you've chosen to take that picture. That in itself is incredibly powerful. When you're photographing the project, especially when you were working with Mimir 7, photographing a 120 film, how much were you shooting? I mean, there must have been days that went by when you didn't even take a frame, I imagine, or because you're in the bush, you're not going to be able to suddenly get some more Kodak portrait. You've got to be incredibly disciplined with the way that you shoot.
You have. I mean, I used to take 500 rolls. So stock was 500 rolls. And commitment. I had a Land Cruiser. I have a Land Cruiser here that has a fridge that I used to run on low, and I used to keep 500 rolls in there. And no, you'd shoot the whole time. You'd have to shoot the whole time. And bearing in mind, you don't know what's going to come around the corner.
Yeah, that's a big thing with any kind of photographic assignment, is you never really. I always find when I do a sent on a story for a magazine, you do sense when you've broken the back of the story. You do sense when you go, okay, I think I've got enough now. I can kind of begin to relax a bit. But up until that point, it's incredibly tense because you just don't know what you're going to see and whether or not this is the moment. Is this the best it's going to get? Is this moment that they nearly shoot the elephant going to be the only chance I get of photographing this potentially?
But it's also, you don't know what's going to come around the corner. Physically, you don't know.
So there's an optimism with it as well, you're saying?
No, I'm saying that something there, you're in the bush. If you're walking through and a black mamba stands up on its end, and then you need to be in a position to be able to photograph that. If you walk up to the elephant and the elephant sees you, it's gonna come. So you're not just waiting for a single moment. You have to be able to. Everything has to be able to move when you move. You can't take an assistant because. So you have to form a relationship. You have to form a trust where you stepped over, if you like, you've morphed into a different situation where the people that you're working with, there's an understanding and a trust. Where the people that you're working with now, you're in a group where you've stepped into this bubble. This bubble moves as one, so you can't step out of it. And that's, for me, is some of the scariest situations. And I've done this in various different places. I've done this in Iraq, and I've done this in other places. But if you've got something like a wild animal, an elephant's easier to deal with, but something like a leopard or a cat, particularly a leopard, you can't break away from a group, because if you break a leopard will go for everybody because they're vindictive. So if there's three of you and you get an attack from a leopard, it will find all three of you. So if you break,
sorry, if you split up, it will
find you. Yeah, it'll come after you.
Oh my God, really?
So, yeah.
I had no idea they would do that.
Yeah, they will. So
that's terrifying.
It is terrifying, and it's even more terrifying if you're standing there with two Vermeer 7s and a bag of film, and the other people involved, are obviously have got rifles. So you have to trust that they're going to do what they say they're going to do. You don't want them to do it, but you don't want them not to do it either, and you don't want them to do it badly either. So you step into this void where you're like, I don't want this to happen, but I'm here to document it. If nothing happens, I'll be happier. But do I have something that I've documented? And if I walk to a point where I am so scared that I want to run, can I run? I can't run. So you're committed. So you step into this void, where you're just okay. I have nowhere to go. I've committed to do this. I'm now working with these people. These people have given me access to their world. I trust them. They trust me. We need to now work together.
I'd love to know a bit more about how what your visual influences are, and how, for example, on a project like this, when you've got the shot, in a sense of, the portrait that we were talking about earlier with the red-headed girl. I mean, that as you said, you referenced paintings, you referenced art history. Did you always have that? Because you came in doing this kind of, the sports photography in a way was almost like your internship into the industry. What did that teach you about photography? And it's kind of interesting that your photography now is incredibly, in many ways, it can be quite quiet and observed, and it feels quite gentle, even though it's covering quite brutal subjects. but you wouldn't have guessed that you had a background in, sports photography.
Yeah.
So I'm interested in that journey and how, were you always interested in paintings? Were you interested in films and movies? Have you always been visually stimulated, or is that
Yeah.
something? Are you more stimulated by the story
No,
and the emotion?
I'm by all of it. I mean, what I do is diarizing my life. What I choose to do with my life maybe gives me an excuse to make it more interesting. But basically, what you're doing is diarizing your life. Somebody once said to me, well, so if we stop trophy hunting, there's a whole group of people who can only go to the remotest parts of the world because they have an excuse, and that's to kill something. If you take that away from them, they have no excuse to go to those parts of the world. So if you can generate income and funding from those people, then, and it goes to conservation, then who's to criticize it? So, it's a great question, right? Because, I felt, having done sports photography, and I was always trying to do remotes. I was always trying to put remotes on stuff. And I was never quite sure why I was doing it. And I was supported by Nikon at the time. And I remember putting one on a canoeist and just thinking, it's perfect, like a 14 mil 3.5, I think it was, on the front of the canoe. It's brilliant. You can go, and it's going to be amazing. I was doing it for the Sunday Times, and I fired it off the shore on remotes. And I was like, this guy called Richard Fox. And I was just like, this is incredible. These pictures are going to be amazing. And he came back and he just said to me, it's like that. And I went, that is fantastic. And he went, yeah, watch this, and did a roll.
Oh.
And I was like,
oh.
It was a film camera in a very roughly made waterproof housing.
Oh.
It was just like, fucked. And I just thought, okay, so I could do it on a long lens. I go, well, if I do it on a long lens, I'm not connected with the subject. So you're right, in as much as, yeah, I was always working on long lenses. And I suddenly got to the point where I was like, I shouldn't be working on long lenses because I'm not having a dialogue with the people I work with. And, so now I don't have any long lenses. Well, I do. I have a Fuji 500, which is incredible, but it's medium format. So I'm shooting 500mm medium format. It's just incredible. It's different.
Sorry, from a boring technical point of view, the move from a Mamiya 7 to the GFX system, was that a cost-based and was that a cost-based decision because the price of film is now just
no.
Okay.
I wish it was, because that would have been really sensible. My Mac, I think my Mac might die. I might have an external battery. Hang on. No, it was based on COVID.
Right.
I found myself doing a story for National Geographic in Kenya, and Kenya closed its boundaries, and I had 500 rolls of film and about 4 or 5 Mamiya 7s and a house, which I still have, and a car. And I was like, okay, I can now no longer process my film. So what do I do? And so I just thought the best thing to do is try and find something that duplicates film as near as possible, and that was Fuji.
Right.
And so I thought, okay, I'm going to try the GFX. And I tried the GFX, and I have a relationship now with Fuji, which is, I mean, is fantastic. And their equipment is just stunning. And I set the GFX up as a Mamiya 7. So I shoot 6.7. Frame is 6.7. And I shoot, super slow speeds, super low ASA, and I use all of their best. I don't use zooms, and I use all of their best lenses. So they're all the 1.7 lenses, and I've just got the 100 RF, which is extraordinary and as near as to a rangefinder as you could possibly get. My man shooting 100 megapixel files, so I can go back to working in situations where I look slightly incompetent and very under-equipped, and I'm super happy with that because I don't step up with a huge white lens or a zoom or anything else. It's not about that. It's about documenting my experience in your world. You let me in, and I will document that experience. And and that's what it's all about. If you look at say, some of the work on, hand like eggs, for instance, on my website, that will kind of show what I'm about and what I'm doing, and that will also show the catastrophic cost of what we do as photographers and journalists when we just don't consider those we leave behind.
Mm-hmm. I feel like now might be a logical time to start talking about your desert island situation. Now, obviously, there is a lab and a fridge, but on this desert island, we've had requests from people in the past. But if you were going to be stranded, would it be a Mamiya 7 that you have with you?
Yeah. Okay. So, desert
right.
island camera, you're asking. Let me have a think about it. I mean, I would have historically probably gone Mamiya 7. Wouldn't question it. But I think the Fujis that I'm using at the moment, and the availability of the Fujis, and the requirement to not have to be processing huge amounts of film and to get similar imagery, I would probably go for the GFX system. I have to say it is exceptionally beautiful, and I mean, it allows me to work at 1.7, which the Mamiyas never did, and I think 1.7 is a lot of the work I do when I can work in very, very low light is extraordinary.
I'm going to nerd out here even further. What's your favorite lens then for that system? Because I'm a Fuji user. I don't have the GFX system yet, but been considering it for a while. What's your favorite lens that you've paired with that?
55.
Yeah, that looks like a beauty.
I mean, 50. I use for everything. I use a 55 and an 80, both 1.7. So, and as I say now, the 100 RF. This weekend, I've been using the 100 RF and try to turn everything off so that it doesn't kind of sort of run along like a car without a driver.
So finally, your desert island photo book is what we need to ask you about. Now, this can be a book that either started off your kind of journey into photography, maybe it was quite instrumental in getting you excited about photography as a genre, or something that you've seen more recently, or both.
Yeah, Peter Beard, end of the game, both. I mean, started off, continued through.
A classic. Peter Beard. So that, an amazing book. End of the game. Obviously, you can see all the connections now and how that got you interested in both photography and conservation. It's an absolute classic. So, I mean, all that leaves for us to say is thank you so much for coming on the show today. It's been an absolute pleasure. I honestly could have gone on for another hour, probably. I've still got loads of questions I would love to have asked you. We never say never in terms of getting you back on down the line, and hopefully we could maybe talk about your more recent project in Saudi Arabia. Maybe by then you'll be living somewhere else, working on a new project. Who knows? So for those of people out there that want to find out more about you, obviously your website is www.davidchancellor.com, and that's Chancellor with Cellor, Chancellor. We will link to that in the show notes, and we will link to your Instagram and all other socials. So thank you once again, Dave, for coming on and giving us the time today. It's been an amazing and really informative chat. Thank you.
Thank you, guys. It's been a pleasure to talk to you.
Thank you so much for listening to the show. If you'd like to find out more, you can find us on YouTube, which is www.youtube.com/@exposednegative. And if you'd like to follow us personally, you can find us both on Instagram. Myself, I'm at Greg Fennell, which is GregFunnell. And Tom can be found at tombarnes.com, which is TomBarnesDotcom. Thank you very much.